You may feel like I've been avoiding this topic, probably because I have been. So sketching, and I know you hear the word and you're like, I'm gonna diffuse that panic for you. So in today's video, we are going to start down the road to joyful, stress-free sketching. Okay, today I'm using my favorite pencil, which is an HB pencil, and I like to keep it sharp, so keep a sharpener nearby. And yes, I am using wedding magazines as inspiration. I know, it sounds crazy, but trust me, wedding magazines are a treasure trove of floral and greenery inspiration. So let's dive into this. I'm going to break down these flower shapes. We're going to start simple and basic and build up the detail. When I'm sketching floral, I usually start at the center. So here you're going to notice me creating just a small, uneven, misshapen tiny circle, and then with very light pressure, I'm creating a very soft circle around that. And then I start breaking down the shapes of that circle into little smiles, basically. I know, you're like, wait, what do you mean? I mean, like, what does the shape of like a cartoon smile look like? That's essentially the shape of these petals that will make up your peony or your rose. And they kind of cup each other and fold around each other around this center dot that you made or circle that you made in the very beginning. Let's break it down even further. So here we go, friends. This is a breakdown of these shapes in the rose or a peony, and this really works for both flowers. It's a very transitional way to approach this flower. So think big circle, and you can even start your sketch this way. 100%. And then a stem and a stem on either side, simple line, and then an off-center circle. And then let's break down these shapes. See how these smiles, these cartoon-shaped smiles intersect one another as we go towards that off-center circle. And these are your basic shapes for a peony or a rose. And you can already see that flower making an appearance. Love it. Now at this point, once you've got your basic shapes down, you can start to further define in terms of line weight. And this is just the way that I sketch. A lot of artists at this point would bring out like an ink pen of some kind and create very kind of straight, evenly pressured lines that outline their pencil sketch, right? And that's gorgeous and beautiful. And we're probably going to show you some of that in future videos here. But one of my favorite ways to define shapes and bring a flower to life when I'm sketching is to increase the pressure on my pencil in areas, not in all places. So I am going over my sketch, but I'm not going over it with the intent to outline every mark that I've made, but to intensify the marks that I've made in different ways with different pressure. And so your sketch, your under sketch, your light marks where you break down the basic shapes become the roadmap for your more defined gestures, your more defined marks later in the sketch. And that is what I'm doing now. You can see I'm adding more personality to these cartoon smile shapes that are interwoven to create these overlapping rose petals. I'm adding some little ruffles on certain edges. I am making certain edges, like these outer edges of the circle, I'm making them more kind of voluminous and bulbous in ways and in areas. And in some areas, I am not even adding darkness to the line. I'm letting it be the light line that it was at the very beginning. But this is such a fun way to use your pencil, to get to know your pencil. Your pencil does what it does because of the pressure that you add to it. So if you add more pressure, you're going to get a thicker line, and less pressure, a thinner, lighter line. And the beauty of that is you can go from thick to thin, light to dark in 1 inch long stroke. So you can just create a continuous stroke, say for your leaf shape, to define your leaf like I'm doing here. And you can create one stroke that has like 3 or 4 different personalities to it. And I find that incredibly exciting when it comes to sketching florals. And another note, don't feel like you have to add this depth, this personality, these darker lines and darker spots with your pencil to every single part of your original sketch. Notice here how I'm literally just abandoning the sketch at this point. I'm by design, I'm not abandoning it because I'm tired of it. I'm leaving areas by design untouched with a darker part of my pencil. I'm just saying to myself, I'm going to let the paint later on sing in those areas. And you're going to see how that decision, that restraint is going to pay off later on. Okay, let's get the basic shapes down for buds. 3 ovals, and they're going to be clustered together. See how light my strokes are? Not touching, but clustered close to one another, 3 ovals. And then add in a light suggestion of how your stems will interact with one another. And see how those stems are converging at one point underneath all those ovals. And that's all you need for the beginning of your buds. You can go into your buds, your ovals right now, and start to further define their shape, giving them a little more volume at the bottom, maybe coming to a little bit of a point at the top. I love going right in and adding little sprays of the under leaves. You know what I'm talking about, those rosebuds that have that beautiful little spray of leaves that are kind of holding up the bud from underneath. So basically those are teardrops, and they are going to radiate out from one point underneath the bud. So just think of 3 teardrops fanned out where all the points of the teardrop meet at one end right underneath the bud. You can further define your stems, add a few more leaves if you'd like. And then I love to go in and start pressing down with my pencil and define where that bud is starting to open up at the top and reveal the color of the rose or the peony to come. So basically making a little crack in the bud, so to speak. So a long, deep V in the middle, or even better, a little off center from the middle, is such a great way to define your buds. I love little notches, deep V, showing that that flower is about to pop through. And that all can be done at the stage where you're starting to press down harder with your pencil. And remember, you don't have to outline perfectly. You want those lines, some to be thick, some to be thin, light, some to be dark. Love that. Apparently, I just love everything because that's my word. So let's count how many times I say love during this session. So back to my magazine, because I always love the idea of having something to refer to as I'm sketching. I have no issue with painting from memory, and I do it a lot, but there's just more times, more often than not, I want to have something to look at. So grab a magazine, grab your plant sitting next to your desk, whatever it is, so that you have something to refer to. Okay, if you're having a good time so far, and I hope you are. I know this is a little more intense than we normally get here, but it's good stuff, right? So give this video a like. I'd be so appreciative, because when you do, it tells me that you're having a good time. It also lets others know that they should pop on in and see what all the fuss is about too. Okay, next up is integral to your sketching journey. Eucalyptus, you're going to use it all the time. One big curved swoop. That's all you need to start. And then a few lazy circles of different size and different shape along that curve, and just stack them. As you get to the top of your stem of eucalyptus, get a little bit skinnier, smaller with your circles. And friends, that's it. That is the base of your eucalyptus. Let's add some detail. When I start to go back in after I've laid down my basic shapes with eucalyptus, it is so fun, because silver dollar eucalyptus, which is more specifically what I'm capturing here, have this amazing shape to them. They are like a lazy circle, but the edges are so beautifully defined. There's no ruffles usually, unless there's been like a little crack or a little break in the leaf. And they have this amazing, like, very subtle vein going down the center. So I love to define that vein with my pencil in most cases, and just press down and define. And remind yourself as you go, silver dollar eucalyptus is essentially round if you're looking at it perfectly from a top-down view. But we've got a curved branch of eucalyptus here. So I'm by design making sure that some of my round shapes are actually ovals, because that makes it feel like you're viewing the eucalyptus, the silver dollar leaf, so to speak, from the side. So it'll give you a really convincing gesture or shape to your eucalyptus if you have some that are front facing and some that are more oval, kind of side facing. I just want you to take a moment here just to look at what we've done so far and look at the personality that we're getting from the line quality. I want to talk about line quality for just a few seconds because line quality is something that is not getting talked about a lot on YouTube when it comes to watercolor and sketching. Line quality is where the quality, the personality, the thickness of your line has personality. It has quality to it. It's not all the same. So take a step back, take a breath, pat yourself on the back and say, wow, look at this gorgeousness I've created just by lifting up and pressing down on my pencil as I go. I hope that you never think again about sketching the same after understanding the amazingness that is line quality. I'm so glad you're here. Let's keep moving on. Okay, you knew I was going to go here, right? Because I'm obsessed with dahlias. So here we go with a zinnia. This could also pass as a dahlia. And this is a top-down facing, front-facing view. So of course, we're going to start with a really light circle. When you're sketching these circles, keep your arm loose, friends. Don't try to control the pencil with your wrist. Keep your arm loose. So big circle, off-center, tiny circle, and then a few teardrop shapes coming out from the upper right side and cascading downwards, stacked on top of each other and descending in size subtly. Create a ruffled outer edge. Just let your pencil dance along the outer edge of that first circle shape that you put down to create kind of a wavy effect. And there you have your basic shape of the zinnia. You can add another outer wavy circle to kind of start to give the effect of layers of petals, but I'm going to go right in, radiating from that off-center circle out with some elongated, blunt-tipped shaped petals. And think of it as a teardrop. I love to use the teardrop as a visual metaphor. It's an elongated teardrop, but each end is blunt. There's no point on either end. And that is your zinnia or your dahlia petal. And you're just going to stack these, layer these. Some are going to be in full view, so they're going to be uninterrupted, and some are going to be layered behind another. I love to add a little notch on the end of some of these petals that's very distinctively zinnia-like. So see that little notch at the end, that blunt end? So don't do that everywhere because that would get boring, but here and there, lovely. And you're just going to keep going round and round and round, overlapping these petals. Make some shorter. I tend to, with the zinnia, make the petals shorter as they get closer to the center. And then as they get out along the edges, they're longer, if that makes sense. And of course, you can add a little bit of detailing to your very, very center. I like to add another circle right inside there. Doesn't have to be perfectly on center with the previous circle that you created. You can darken it up a little bit with your pencil. And then a few little scratchy marks around that original center that you sketched out. Just pressing down on that pencil hard and scratch, scratch, wiggle and lift and kind of do that all around the edge will give you really nice depth right off the bat with your definition marks here and your pencil. Make sure that the outer edge of your zinnia isn't continuous. That makes things really interesting. So interrupt that outer edge, that original ruffly edge that we roughed out in the first sketching stages. Interrupt that edge with some notches, with some ins and outs. Add some added layers, and then go ahead and define your leaves. And I really exaggerated the points on these leaves. So very quickly, my leaves evolved from a classic teardrop shape to a very defined pointed leaf that really had an exaggerated curve to it. And I added this kind of ruffly quality to the outer edge of my leaf. And I just went slow, in and out, pretty even pressure on these leaves. So that these leaves are all defined pretty similarly. There isn't a lot of line quality, so there isn't a lot of difference in pressure here because I love these leaves and I want them all to stand out. I think as a trio of leaves, they're just fantastic. And so I was okay with them all being bold. Okay, don't panic, but it's hydrangea time. Big circle, friends, and it's kind of a squat circle. And then a big leaf shooting out from the right side and another big leaf kind of curving underneath the bottom of the big hydrangea circle. And then interrupt that hydrangea circle shape that you created initially with a wavy edge. And this is your basic hydrangea shape. Moving on. Okay, so a hydrangea is basically one big poof of a flower made up by little tiny flower poofs, right? So I like to think about hydrangea petals. They're little clusters of flowers. They're almost like little tiny daisies with short little squat petals, or little forget-me-nots or little petunias, and they're all clustered together. So I like to make some of these little flowers front-facing and some side-facing. So some of these flowers, like the first few that I drew, are going to have 4 or 5 petals, and some are only going to have 2 or 3 because they're side-facing, and we can only see some of the petals from that angle. So let me break it down for you. Don't be overwhelmed, because all you're doing essentially is filling in that original hydrangea poof shape that you sketched out early on. You're filling that in with smaller flowers. Some are front facing, some are side facing, and some are kind of like a weird in between. And you're just filling them in until your poof is full. And my tips for you to make sure that it doesn't get boring and kind of ho-hum is just keep your line pressure, your line weight, keep it interesting. Make sure you're making some lines darker and some lighter. And make sure you're really changing up. You don't want to have 3 front-facing hydrangea flowers right next to each other, right? So mix it up. Do that. And before you know it, you're going to have this big, full, beautiful hydrangea gorgeousness in front of you. And it's not overwhelming. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Another tip, make sure the edge of that hydrangea poof, that original basic shape that you sketched out with that ruffly edge, make sure as you're defining that, it's interesting along the edge. You really want to have some of those petals really popping out of the shape. You don't want it to feel like a cotton candy tree, or do you know what I mean? Like we see those, like when we were in first grade, we draw trees and they all just kind of look like a cloud on a stick. It's because the edges of the cloud weren't interesting enough. You need to have some stuff interrupting the edge. And the same thing applies here. So just make sure you have some elements, some petals, some little moments of interest interrupting that original shape you roughed out. One of my favorite things to do with this kind of sketching, and I alluded to it earlier, but we are going to paint this today. Yeah, we're going to paint this, and it's just going to be washes, and it's glorious, and it's gorgeous, and I love this technique. So everything that I'm doing is leading us to that point. And so I love adding veins into the leaves because I know when I paint these later, those pencil sketched veins are going to pop right through the sheer watercolor washes and just be gorgeous. So take some time now with a really personality-filled pencil stroke and add those gorgeous veins to your leaves. Now remember, don't add all the same type of veins, the same short strokes, long strokes, curved strokes. Like mix it up, but get those veins in there because they're gonna be so good later on. One more thing I wanna point out before we move on. As I'm sketching here, you might notice that some of my little hydrangea flowers are made up of like a continuous stroke. where I'll start kind of at the center and make a little circle, and then I'll start working out little teardrops radiating around the circle. And I won't pick up my pencil for probably longer than you would expect. And that's just a little me. That's a little Christy flair. Try it. It can be really fun to create one whole flower detail without picking up your pencil. So just a little something some of you probably noticed that I wanted to make note of, but you do you. Pick up your pencil as much as you want. But yeah, I don't know, give it a try. It's super cool. Okay, greenery, we're gonna do another little swoopy stroke, kind of an S curve, a very, very shallow S curve. And then we're gonna build out along that S curve some very basic teardrop shapes. And these teardrop shapes, each one's gonna look different. Some are gonna be fatter, skinnier, longer. Some are gonna have like a rounded edge on the outside edge. Some are gonna be pointed, and that is it. We're gonna define this more. Let's go. Now, as you go in to define these leaf shapes, you don't have to get terribly creative. You've already laid out some really cool shapes, variety, versions of a teardrop. So you've got some pointed, some fat, some long, some squat. So at this point, it's really just about defining those shapes, adding some interesting line quality, defining some of the veins. And you'll notice here, I am kind of making that branch of the leaf a little thicker. So I'm basically doubling up on that original S curve that I added. I'm mirroring it to create like a thicker branch-like vibe. But that's really it. I'll tell you what, this little branch of leaves, friends, is going to become like your creative best friend. You're going to use it all the time once you've mastered it. And it's not going to take you long to master it. I kind of feel like you've already mastered it. This is so fun, right? Okay, last but certainly not least, a little curved stem, berries. So you're just going to lightly rough in circles. You're going to cluster them together. Some are going to start to touch one another. You're going to be lazy and sloppy with these right now. This is just roughing in your shapes. Rough in some small teardrops for leaves, and you're going to have a really good sense of the basic structure of your berry branch. Okay, now I'm a little further along, but basically, just think about your line quality. You want to define those round berry shapes. And I'll let you in on a little secret, friends. Berries are not perfectly round. Nothing is perfect in nature. I mean, I'm sure there's some like science types out there that are probably going to prove me wrong on what I just said, but you know what I mean. You don't have to stress about these berries being perfectly round. They just need to be roundish to be convincing. And so I'm using a little heavier pressure as I go around that circle shape. I'm even adding some extra little berries from my original roughed out sketch. And I'm further defining those teardrop leaves with some additional curve, with some veins, but I'm not getting too fancy with those berry leaves because honestly, I want the berries to be the show here. And the part of the definition in this version of your sketch, at this point in your sketch, the part that really is important is that little center, because these are blueberries. If I didn't mention already, I made these blueberries. So you're gonna have a little dot at the center. And then some of them, I like to add a little ruffle around the dot because it just feels so very blueberry-ish. And now change the location of your dot, friends. Always change up the location of your dot. Some I make perfectly center. That's kind of a top-down view of the berry. And then some are totally off-center. And then some even look like they're kind of resting atop the berry. That's giving you even another angle to view these from. And with all the angles thrown together in this one spray of berries, it's a very convincing kind of natural feel. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not like a photorealist or anything, but keeping in mind all these different angles that come into view and applying them to parts of your sketch really up the convincing level of your illustration. Okay, friends, so the sketching part of this is done, and we are going to dive into a one-layer, wet-on-wet watercolor wash extravaganza. It's going to be quick, it's going to be satisfying, and it might make you a little nervous, but here's what we're going to do. Now you're seeing me doing the thing that we're gonna do, and I'm purposely showing it to you sped up because I want you to see the simplicity of it so you don't get kind of tunnel vision when we actually start doing this. Okay, so it's basically throwing down some pigment on the page or some water on the page, staying within the lines of the sketch that you've already done, and moving that pigment around, right? So it's either wet on dry, wet on wet, and just moving all that color and water around within the shape of your sketch. And you know, with wet on wet, you can then add in other colors and make all the awesome stuff happen. And that's basically what we're gonna do. Now, don't worry, I'm gonna slow this down and we're gonna go through it step by step with the last few flowers, but I wanted you to see an overview. Let's do this. I'm adding clean water, and I'm kind of being very careful here, staying within my sketched lines, going right over top some of them, but it's clean water, friends. And I'm being generous. I'm being super generous with that water. It's almost like a puddle, not totally a puddle, but close. And then I'm going right in with juicy color. I've sprayed my palette down and I'm dabbing in juicy color, rinsing my brush a little bit, and then going around with the water that's on that brush and spreading it around, and then adding more juicy color, and then just pushing and pulling that color around. So pushing the color means you're using the force of your brush in one direction to kind of move color into another area of your painting. And as you do that, your color, your paint, your pigment runs out and it gets lighter. And you add more water to your brush and you're just pushing and pulling that pigment around. But also at the same time, don't push it too much. Let it do what it wants to do because it does some cool stuff on its own. Clean my brush down, adding a little bit of like a yellow-green to the center. And this is it, friends, for this style, this kind of sketchy, then washy watercolor style. I sketch, I add line quality and personality to my sketch, and then I do a wet on wet, one layer, and I'm peace out because it doesn't need anything else. It's so good, so gorgeous, so satisfying to your creative soul. And why would we add any more? I mean, of course, there's other ways to paint. And actually in this series, we're going to explore all the different ways to sketch, then paint. But this is my favorite, and so it's the first. Now, you can also add color without wetting the shape first. I did that with this leaf right here. I just went right in with a medium green. And then to switch it up a little bit, add a little bit of highlight, I took a damp but clean brush and kind of scooped some of that green out. And that's giving me my highs and my lows. If you're as excited as I am right now, can I just ask a favor? Could you give this video a boop? That's a like. I think other people should know all the fun we're having here. And trust me, there's a lot of fun to go around. So I'd be so appreciative. All right, let's move on to the hydrangea. I'll show you another way to do this wet and wet. So I'm just taking my 3/4 inch flat wash brush and I'm dabbing a few strokes within the shape of the hydrangea poof. I'm staying in the lines, friends. I know, I'm all about freedom and joy, but I'm staying in the lines on this one. Few different colors. I did a teal, I did a purple, I did like a smoky blue. And then I'm taking my clean but damp 1/2 inch dagger and I'm just pushing those colors around. And by doing that, by moving the colors from one spot to another, I'm starting to blend them. And now I add a few more dabs of purple because I want that intensity. And I then just take a clean brush and continue dabbing clean water and more color. And I dab clean water, more color, and I've got a wet on wet, crazy town, beautiful thing going on. Do you see what's happening to this hydrangea? It's happy. And all of the sketching that you did is still shining through. You're still seeing all that detail you added. It's just this magical combination. That's why I love this style, because you've got the tightness and the specificity of the sketch mingled with the personality and the juiciness of the watercolor. It's like a win-win, best of all the worlds thing. I'm happy. Are you happy? I hope you're happy. I'm continuing on with this technique. I'm going wet on dry right now. Like I did a little bit of this on the zinnia leaf. I'm doing wet on dry. adding a green. I used kind of like a soft celery green, and then I picked up a little yellow on my brush and I blend them together. And now everything's wet, so it's all just wet on wet. Now, if you want to know more about these techniques, I'm talking about pushing and pulling and wet on wet and wet on dry, and you're like, Christy, wait, what? I want you to watch this video. It's important. It's going to talk about all the basics, all the techniques that you need to have fun in Christy land. I promise it's worth it. Okay, now I added some yellow green to this big leaf on the right here, and I'm going right in. I didn't even clean my brush, friends, I'll be honest, and added the same smoky blue that I was putting in the hydrangea earlier. And now I'm just roughing in some soft brown to create that kind of woody stalk of the hydrangea. And friends, I'm almost done. This is where we're gonna land with the hydrangea. I don't feel the urge here to let this dry and add more layers and make it super realistic. I could, but I don't feel the need to because I am just blown away and enamored with and inspired by the beauty of what it is right now. Now, you're probably wondering, well, Christy, what do we do with all this? So tell me in comments, would you be interested in another video where I take these exact flowers and turn them into a composition? Let me know if that would be fun. Just comment below fun, ! And I'll know you're on board for that. All right, last but not least, the blueberries. And so I'm starting with some blues, 2 different blues already. I'm going right in, wet pigment on a dry page. And you'll notice I brought that pencil back out because I wanted to define my shapes a little bit more. I wanted to add an extra blueberry in the background there. And yes, one of my strokes went outside the lines, and instead of trying to fix it, I just made another berry. This is joy, friends, making these kind of decisions in the moment and not worrying about what it was supposed to be, but instead focusing on what it is now and how awesome it is now. That's joy. That's freedom in painting. Anyway, I digress. See, I did it again. I went back in with the pencil because I went outside my lines. Adding in some dark in the centers here with my round brush, just dabbing it in. And yes, the original blues that I put down are still wet. So I'm getting some explosions. I'm getting some diffusion of color. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. These smaller berries, I'm making them all dark blue. And this is the beauty of it. This is one layer watercolor washes on top of your sketch. And when you discover this way, there is such freedom to be had. All right, friends, I hope you've had a blast. I hope that I've kind of cracked open your creative brain in a new way today. I feel like I've re-empowered myself as an artist. Is that even a word? Re-empowered? I feel so energized, and that is the point of this journey. If you want to continue this feeling, if you're like, oh, I know she's ending this video right now and I'm not having it, I want you to watch this one, because painting peonies 3 different ways is about as energizing as watercolor can be. So until next time, happy painting, friends.